Hey guys, I'm back with another video, and today I'll be doing something a little different from the usual content. I'll be ranking all of the MCU films from best to worst. Yes, I'm gonna be doing it a little differently than normal people do. So I'm gonna start off with number one, and then start from the best, and then move down all the way to the worst film in the MCU. So without further ado, here's my number one. Number one, Avengers: Infinity War. Now I'm sure this is probably everybody's number one, but you can't blame me for putting it up here. The Russo brothers had the Herculean task of fitting over 20 main characters from over 10 years of Marvel cinematic history into a single movie, and they did so almost perfectly while giving everyone enough screen time and chances to shine. Infinity War also gives us one of movie history's best villains in Thanos, played amazingly by Josh Brolin, who will now no doubt sit alongside Darth Vader as one of geekdom's most iconic villains. The movie also had the balls to end the way it did, even though we all know those who died are most definitely coming back. I mean, come on, they already have a trailer for Spider-Man Far From Home. But despite all of that, the movie is well written, decently paced, beautifully shot, and is undeniably the best film in the MCU. This is a movie that's a must-watch. Number 2, Captain America: The Winter Soldier. Now, while Captain America: The Winter Soldier isn't my number one in this list, it is definitely my favorite MCU film. Not only is it perfectly paced, it plays out more like a spy action film more than it does a comic book superhero movie. The movie has a great fleshed out villain in the Winter Soldier who ties in well with the overall narrative, and a solid supporting cast in Black Widow, Falcon, and Nick Fury that makes the film entertaining from start to finish. Not to mention, this movie was the one movie that almost made Captain America my favorite Avenger. I don't really need to say more. Even if you aren't a fan of superhero or comic book films, you owe it to yourself to at least watch this fun espionage story once. Number 3, Captain America: Civil War. Now, to be honest, this movie was a better Avengers movie than Age of Ultron, and when compared to the Iron Man and Thor trilogies, it does have the unfair advantage of having a massive cast of superheroes to add to the drama and to the plot. Ultimately, however, this story does focus on Captain America, and the conflict between the two sides, Tony and Steve, does make for a compelling narrative. The tension between the two is believable, and the course of events does make a lot of sense. I mean, come on, Tony has every right to want to blast Bucky to smithereens, and there is no way he would have lost to Cap and Bucky if he were serious, but I digress. Tony was definitely holding back. Overall, Civil War is a fun action film through and through with a solid script, solid direction, and amazing action. Number 4, Spider-Man: Homecoming. Now, as a massive Spider-Man fan, I couldn't really enjoy the Mark Webb, Andrew Garfield Spider-Man films, as he didn't really capture the essence of the character. And while Sam Raimi was successful to a certain extent, there was still more to be improved upon. Enter Spider-Man: Homecoming, the second best Spider-Man film ever to be made. Tom Holland, while still not the definitive Spider-Man in my eyes, portrays the nerdy character very well. His relationship with his friend Ned Leeds and the coming-of-age story of him rising to the occasion makes for a fun and emotional narrative. I almost teared up at the sight of Peter Parker struggling to lift the rubble off his back in that one scene when the Vulture tricked him. The stakes in this movie aren't very high like other superhero MCU films, but that's okay as the film is carried very well by Michael Keaton's Vulture, who makes for the MCU's most relatable villain. If it weren't for Thanos, he'd probably be my favorite villain. And, while it's fun to watch Peter Parker be this bumbly, inexperienced Spider-Man, I hope to see him kick more ass in Spider-Man Far From Home. Number 5, Iron Man. This movie is definitely my favorite origin movie of the MCU, and Robert Downey Jr.'s Tony Stark is a great introduction to the whole cinematic universe. Through this movie, you will see the struggle and pain that Tony has to go through to become Iron Man, and it makes for a very compelling film. While the movie does have a very cliché villain in Obadiah Stane, RDJ's rendition of the Iron Man character makes for a great watch, with a movie that is able to balance out the tones of seriousness and comedy very well, which is something that Thor Ragnarok was unable to do. Despite being an older-fashioned Phase 1 MCU film, Iron Man is still number 5 on my list, and this movie proves that RDJ is the perfect Iron Man. Number 6, Black Panther. Now, Black Panther is a number of things, but it is definitely not Oscar-worthy. However, it is still a great MCU film, and it does have a riveting tale of T'Challa's rise to power as a king in his own right. The film oozes style and personality with a cast of fun and interesting characters. The film also stars a black superhero, which is nice for someone like me who is African American. And to top it all off, Black Panther also serves to provide us with one of the MCU's most compelling villains in Killmonger, who I wish was more fleshed out and had more screen time. And also, Black Panther would have also benefited from not using CGI for the entirety of the final fight. But nevertheless, Black Panther was a great film and is definitely a must-watch MCU movie. Number 7. Ant-Man. Now, I'm sure a lot of you will disagree with Ant-Man being this high on the list, and even if I did explain in perfect detail why, you'd probably disagree. One thing I like about Ant-Man is that the movie doesn't take itself too seriously. However, I am aware that it does have a villain that's essentially the same thing as Obadiah Stane and a plot that isn't too original. The movie, however, is so entertaining because of Paul Rudd's performance. You can tell that this guy is having a lot of fun playing the character, and I personally had a blast watching his antics on screen. Ant-Man himself is a very realistic character who isn't a super genius like Tony or a super soldier like Cap, which makes him all the more relatable. The movie too had quite a lot of heart from Scott's interactions with his daughter and comedy that had me bursting out in laughter a couple times. While certainly not an amazing film, Ant-Man was a film that propelled the character to becoming my favorite Avenger in the MCU. Number 8. Guardians of the Galaxy. Now, the first Guardians movie is the MCU's most stylish film, and it had comedy that felt very authentic. Unlike the quippy comedy that the MCU is used to having nowadays, jokes and moments of levity felt really at home in this movie, and the chemistry between the ensemble cast of characters is very strong. What sets the Guardians aside from the rest of the MCU films is the fact that these dudes aren't exactly heroes, and they have very nuanced personalities. Rocket and Star-Lord are douchebags, Drax is a delusional knucklehead, Groot is a gentle giant, and Gamora is an angry lady assassin who's actually the most dangerous in the team. But somehow when put together, these relatively unknown characters make for a very fun to watch team. The film would have been made so much better had Ronan been a more interesting villain though. Number 9. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. Now, while the movie felt more like a Guardians 1.5, I still had a great time watching its rather self-contained story. The movie improved upon the first one slightly by having a more interesting villain in Kurt Russell's ego, and it had more of the same Guardians tomfoolery that we've come to expect. However, the movie does suffer from several pacing issues which does hold it back from being better. But overall, Guardians of the Galaxy 2 is still a great watch, and I look forward to watching the third installment of this series. It's just a shame that its production was delayed because Disney was being stupid. Number 10. The Avengers. Now, this was the film that brought the likes of Thor, Iron Man, and Captain America together on the big screen, and because of that, it's a bit overglorified and overhyped, as it was kind of the first of its kind. But that doesn't detract from the fact that The Avengers was a pretty fun and decent team-up movie with high stakes. Every member of the team had their time to shine, and yes, that includes the weaker and less important Avengers like Black Widow and Hawkeye, who have now grown into these massive juggernaut fan favorites. The movie also has a great villain in Loki, but I do wish he was a bit stronger and more menacing like he is in the comics, as here he didn't feel like too much of a threat. Nevertheless, The Avengers is is a fun action romp that doesn't try too hard to be what it's not, and it's a great film. Number 11, Captain America: The First Avenger. I like this movie a lot. I don't exactly know why. Maybe it's watching Chris Evans play the earnest and righteous Captain America for the first time, maybe it's the World War II 1940s feel that the movie has, or maybe it's the super comic booky plot of a super science Nazi wanting to take over the world. I'm not really sure, but Captain America is still one of my favorite MCU films. It was fun to watch Steve transition from this skinny weakling to this swole hunk of man that is Captain America, and how he ultimately transitions into the man out of time. It's nothing out of this world, but it's great and it's simple, and the actors all play their roles pretty well. Number 12, Doctor Strange. Now, Doctor Strange was pretty solid. It did a lot of things right and a few wrong here and there, but overall the movie had a great cast in Benedict Cumberbatch's Strange, Chiwetel Ejiofor's Mordo, and Tilda Swinton's Ancient One, and it had a pretty decent but cookie-cutter plot that was relatively easy to follow. The movie, however, could have used a lot more innovation in its action scenes and villains. I mean, come on, these guys are wizards. The Ancient One herself is said to be the most powerful sorcerer on Earth, and yet when faced with a threat like Caecilius, who channels the power of the Mirror Dimension and Dormammu, her defense is a set of magic fans? I mean, what? Yeah, the action in this movie is pretty boring, but the climax of the film, which involves Doctor Strange annoying Dormammu into submission, was pretty dang clever, and that's why Doctor Strange is number 12. Number 13, Thor Ragnarok. Now let's get one thing out of the way. I don't really like Thor Ragnarok, but it is a decent MCU film. The movie was funny, but sometimes the comedy was to the detriment of the film. I mean, sometimes the jokes broke the continuity. I mean, how does the God of Thunder get electrocuted into unconsciousness? That's just stupid. But okay, I digress. The movie had some fun bits, like Thor's interaction with Bruce Banner was fun, Loki was still a fun character, and there were some welcome additions to the film series like Valkyrie and Hela. And Hela herself was a very entertaining villain who isn't really given enough screen time. The climax of the movie also was pretty cool. It involved Thor destroying Asgard to save it, when he was trying so hard to save Asgard, which was a pretty fun and inventive way to beat a villain. Number 14, Avengers Age of Ultron. Age of Ultron is a very flawed Avengers movie that is overstuffed with too many side plots. While the movie is epic and chock full of action, the plot and pacing has a lot of issues. Ultron, while played magnificently by James Spader, doesn't feel like much of a threat, and you never actually feel like the Avengers were gonna lose. The Avengers themselves don't really get a lot of character development, with quips being the emphasis of the dialogue in the movie. Also, Iron Man is a complete dick in this one. What happened to all the development in Iron Man 3? While Age of Ultron was a fun action romp, it was not a very memorable film. The movie also had a very ham-fisted romance between Hulk and Black Widow, which was... Also, why does Scarlet Witch wear such a low-hanging shirt? I mean, I like boobs as much as the next guy, but come on. Number 15, Thor. The first Thor was okay. To be honest, I like this one more than Thor Ragnarok. It had a serviceable plot and a compelling and interesting villain in Loki, who is played brilliantly by Tom Hiddleston. Aside from that, there's also some drama mixed in between Thor and his father and whether or not he's worthy to wield the hammer. The bromance between Thor and his warrior mates was also pretty cute, and it's sad that they were killed off 2 seconds into Thor Ragnarok. Okay, maybe not 2 seconds, but you get my point. Overall, Thor was an alright movie, it just could use some improvements to the action. Number 16, Iron Man 3. Yeah, this film isn't bad, it's actually alright, but the changes that they made from the comic books really bring it down. The movie turns an interesting comic book villain, the Mandarin, into some dude who can regenerate and breathe fire like one time? Yeah, the movie isn't a great MCU film, it's a decent Shane Black film though. But I did pay money to watch Iron Man be Iron Man, dammit, and we really don't get a lot of that. Yeah, and I know the movie doesn't have to be like the comics to be good, I understand that. But the changes from the comics that they have made are to the detriment of the film. The villain is boring and cliche and his origins are uninteresting. And while the plot was alright and the romance between Tony and Pepper was cute, I did not like this film one bit, and it's one that I don't often go back to. Number 17, Ant-Man and the Wasp. While I did have fun with this movie, the plot was pretty boring. Again, it was fun to see Paul Rudd as Ant-Man with Evangeline Lilly's Wasp added to the mix, but what was the point of this story? Ghost was an okay villain, but the overall plot was pretty lackluster. While it was still an entertaining film, Ant-Man and the Wasp had a plot stretched so thin and a story that served as mostly filler to kill time before Avengers Endgame. Number 18, Captain Marvel. Now this will definitely be a controversial placement for most people, but hear me out. Captain Marvel isn't a good film. It's a mediocre one with wasted potential. While the film does have a solid first act and solid action, it just doesn't do a superhero origin movie right, and it gets so many things wrong. The character herself doesn't go through any compelling or interesting arcs. She meets a strong bad guy, she just overpowers them. Her hands are bound by something, she just blasts harder to get through the cuffs. She's getting taken over by the Supreme Intelligence, she just gets stronger by somehow breaking the limiter placed on her. Captain Marvel herself doesn't go through any struggle or hardship, and her relationship with her best friend was just not fleshed out enough for it to be emotional or realistic. Also, the way Nick Fury lost his eye was just ridiculous, and it isn't just an insult to his comic history, but his MCU history as well. While the movie was fun, I had a blast with it, it was just wasted potential. And also, for those who think Goose stole the show, you're idiots. Fight me. Number 19, Iron Man 2. Now, I don't really want to say much about this movie. Like Thor, The Dark World, Iron Man 2 also didn't do much for the character, with a villain that isn't as bad as Malekith, but he's up there. I mean, come on, you had Mickey Rourke as a villain. How did you manage to screw that one up? Mickey Rourke is great. I mean, alright, whatever. Nevertheless, Iron Man 2 is still a pretty fun action movie that, in my opinion, is a little bit of a filler, but it was still a fun watch. Number 20, The Incredible Hulk. The plot for this movie was serviceable, and Edward Norton played a relatively believable Bruce Banner. It was a pretty decent by-the-numbers action flick, but the effects in the movie were just the worst. The big CGI fight between the Hulk and Abomination especially was just awful, but overall it does still have a better plot and character development than Thor: The Dark World, so that's why it's number 20 on this list. Number 21, Thor: The Dark World. Now, do I need to say much about this movie? It was boring, it was forgettable, and overall just a waste of time, and it had zero progression on Thor's character development. Despite having an amazing director who has worked on Game of Thrones, one of the best shows on TV, Thor: The Dark World served to do nothing but to introduce another Infinity Stone to the MCU. Alright, so that's my list. What did you think of it? Leave your own rankings in the comments below. I'm quite interested to see what you guys feel about the MCU in general and where you would rank all of the movies. Special thanks to RaidenHides for editing this entire video. Couldn't have done it without you, buddy. So yeah, leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and until then, peace.